Hello and welcome to Scale Stuff. In this week's video, I'm going to be building the Takom 1/35th scale Mammoth tank VK100. This late war paper panzer never got off the drawing board, but being part of the production of the more famous Mouse tank, straight off the bat, you know that this is going to be a big old girl when built. In the box, you get a full colour glossy instruction sheet, a sheet of photo etch, decals to make 4 versions of tank, polycaps for the wheels, a full metal barrel, metal pins for the tracks, the sprues to make the kit, and 2 sets of 2-part tracks, so quite an extensive array of materials to work with in this kit. A quick look at the sprues shows them to be very crisp, with virtually no flash or seam lines. To be honest, this is to be expected as this is a very new kit. Made in 2022, this kit is less than a year old at the time of making this video. A nice feature of the sprues is they are marked by the hollow letter tab, which is something I love seeing on sprues as it makes finding the right sprue faster at a glance. Anyway, onto the build. First thing on the menu is the lower hull. There's just a few simple little bits to add here to get the hull ready for the wheels in the next step. First impressions are good. These parts are practically falling into place. Next up, a bit more involved now, is the wheels and suspension. Lots of things to make here, so it's production line time. It's all simple and easy. Having looked through the instructions, this is probably the most in-depth that the kit gets, as the Mammoth's a fairly clean tank with not much clutter on it. As there are so many bits to make here, it will pay to keep track of each part to make the next step easier. But before I can start on the next step, it's time for some pre-painting. I'm going to be painting all of the wheels and running gear in Tamiya Dark Yellow XF60. To help paint the wheels, I've stuck them on cocktail sticks as it makes handling them so much easier. With the first coat on the wheels, I'm skipping a bit forward to paint the sides and fenders so they're dry and ready for assembly when I come to that step. To paint these, I'm using Rattle Can Tamiya Oxide Red. I do this off screen and outside to avoid getting high. While the red's drying, I'm painting all the wheel rims and worn areas with Army Painter gunmetal. With everything dry, this is where the real fun begins, assembling the track areas. Though it looks simple, I found this bit a little tricky and kept putting the wheels on the wrong way. For those building or thinking of building one of these kits at home, read and reread the instructions when adding the wheels and suspension, and make sure you know which part of the hull is the front to avoid an idiot moment, as I read the instructions wrong and thought the main hull was in the same orientation in both pictures. Making mistakes here with the wheels is no real issue though, as they're push-fit polycaps and any mistakes can be easily fixed. Here, make sure to fit the rear panel of the tank before the side piece is set, as if you left the side pieces to dry without adding this bit, it could prove problematic. With that fun and games over, it's onto the tracks. The tracks in this kit are an interesting concept, made in two parts in what I found out the hard way is vinyl or PVC, held together with a pin. The idea is nice, but both of these materials do not like acetone at all, so don't do what I did and use spray paint on these tracks, as the acetone propellant in it will react and turn them into chewing gum. This for me was very annoying, as you can imagine. I've used spray paints to base coat tons of tracks in the past and never had this problem. Thankfully though, after leaving the goop to reassemble on a molecular level, the plastic hardened back up, and I just had enough track left to complete the kit. I wish that the kit said the tracks were PVC somewhere on the box, as I'd have just stuck to normal acrylics. The key thing is here though, that they're on, so moving on. Next up on the build menu is the front upper hull. This kit's really simple here, just a few little bits to add. To help hold the hull on while it dried, I used elastic bands. The fit was pretty good, but I didn't want to risk a gap in the finished hull. Looking at how this tank is coming together, I keep thinking it has an almost sci-fi look to it. Now onto the back deck of the hull. There are two options for the rear deck of the tank here, with photo etch parts for both. I'm going to use the one that uses the most photo etch and has the most detail on it, as this paper panzer is very simple and any extra detail is very much welcome. I like the exhausts on the other version of rear deck, so I'm adding them to this deck. As being a paper panzer and in my eyes a what if tank, it's there to have some fun with and, kind of do what you like with really. With that done, it's time to add the rear deck to the rest of the hull. At first I thought the fit here was a little off, but after a little nudge both pieces practically clicked into place. With that on, it's onto the turret. This kit comes with two options for the mantlet. Naturally, I'll be picking the bigger mantlet and barrel options to go on this beast. The turret's fairly simple and goes together well. I was worried that the axle for the barrel might not be able to hold the metal barrel's weight. However, after assembling this bit, I don't think that's going to be an issue. The turret top to turret base fit is good, but I'm adding elastic bands here to make sure it doesn't shift while drying. Just a few more details to add to the tank now. With the turret hatch, I'm not going to glue it on, as I'm going to see if I can fit a figure in here later on. Last but not least, the kit has you add the barrel. The metal barrel in this kit is a nice touch, but I'm a bit sad that there's no rifling in the barrel, though I'm not sure if the German barrels were rifled, so it might be more accurate. Anyway, with that in and the turret on, that completes the build stage of this model. Now onto the painting. Firstly, I'm painting the whole tank oxide red using Tamiya spray paint. Before I do this, I mask off the tracks. I'm using electrical tape because it's all I've got. There are better things to do this with, but I don't have any of them to hand. With the mask on, I give it a couple of coats of Tamiya oxide red, and yeah, this is how it's looking. I'm looking forward to painting up this Mammoth in a nice factory finish red oxide base theme, but naturally this isn't going to be the end for the painting. Next up, it's time to add some interest to the turret. I'm painting the mantlet in Tamiya XF60. I want to make this tank look like it was done right at the end of the war when the Germans were low on paint and parts. I think this mantlet kind of looks like the Jag Tiger mantlet, so I want to give it a kind of made from the odd spares look. Mantlet done, it's onto the barrel. The Germans prime their barrels in a grey colour, so I'm painting this bit in Army Painter Dungeon Grey. With that on, it's time to try something completely different, recommended by a friend. Sponge chipping. I've mixed up some dark black brown and I'm blotting off the sponge to remove most of the paint. Then it's just a case of gently tapping the areas that the tank would come into contact with things. I found that as the sponge lost more and more of its paint, the effect became better for lighter, less dense chips on open panels, and that the first dabs were better for high impact zones like the front and rear of the hull. The sponge can't get everywhere in control though, so some spots I'm getting into with a fine brush. I'm quite happy with how the chippings come out on this model, so thank you Radic for recommending this method. Chipping on, it's time to add the decals. The Takom decals are really thick, so I'm not going to use many of them. As it's a prototype Panda that never really was, I'm also adding a few other random decals I've got left over from other kits. I'm going for a sort of Red Devil theme with the Devil and Pitchfork logos around the tank. I still wanted to put the hull number on the tank, but because this is really fine, I hand painted this off screen. Decals on, it's time to start the weathering. To do the first bit, I'm using a cotton bud and white paint. I dab most of the paint off and apply to a slightly damp hull. Then I streak it down in the direction that water would flow. After adding some white streaks, I then add some brown streaks. Once that's done, I want to add some dirt to the upper decks. Here I do the same thing, but move the cotton bud round in circles, as the mud wouldn't flow off from here. It also helps give the effect of sun fading. With that done, it's time to add some panel lines to the model. I watered down some black and hit all the weld lines and joins between the panels. Now it's time to add some mud and grime to the sides of the model. Here I'm just dry brushing BS Dark Earth, slowly building up a nice dusty layer. With that on, I turn my attention to the tracks. I wash these in BS Dark Earth. Afterwards, I use this same wash to do some mud splatter, flicking the brush down the sides of the tank to add a bit more interest to the dirt. The tank's nearly done now. For this last bit though, I'm getting out the oil paints to do the exhaust stains. Oil paints are great, and if you've not used them before, I really suggest that you give them a try, as they're very forgiving to use, as they take about 3 days to dry. So I'm doing these exhaust stains before going away for the weekend, so I'm less tempted to touch it while it's drying. After adding a figure to the turret and a few days of drying, this is the finished tank. I'm quite pleased with how this tank's come out. I really wanted to pull out all the stops on this model, and it's been nice to try a few different methods on this tank. In conclusion, the Takom Mammoth is an alright kit, Construction wise, it is a very simple build and everything in this kit falls into place easily. A beginner would have no problem in building this kit as it's got a fairly low part count and there are no real fit issues with any of the parts. The components also require very little cleanup. Some things that let the kit down are: sometimes the instructions in the kit are a bit vague and could have done with being more spread out into more stages to make it more obvious as to the best order to add parts. This would have been handy on the wheel adding stage of the kit as there are a lot of components to add in one go. Also, pointing out that the rear panel needs to go on before the side pieces, otherwise you're not going to fit it in, would be handy. The paint plan in this kit also doesn't include a top-down view, which I think is a simple thing to add, and yeah, come on Takom, finish your paint guides off properly. Also, the Takom decals in this model are very thick with a lot of carrier film. The biggest problem I had with this kit was the tracks though. I wish that the kit said somewhere what the tracks were made of. Using rattle can paints at this point was my choice, one which I have to take responsibility for, but without knowing what the tracks were made of, this choice was an uninformed one. But at least in the end it worked out, so no harm, no fuss I guess. Costing £60, this kit is a bit on the expensive side for myself. This kit is a new release though, and it's also a very big model, being bigger than a King Tiger. The kit does also include photo etched, a metal barrel, and the posh one-piece tracks, which need to be taken into account when you're thinking about the price. So after factoring all that in, I'd say the price is still expensive, but fair. Anyway, that's my build and review of the Takom 1/35 scale Mammoth paper panzer. As always, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and it helps you out if you're building or thinking of buying one of these kits at home. Until next time though, look after yourself and have a good one. Goodbye.